back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I am here today to talk to you about 3 books that I recently read and do some quick reviews for you to let you know what I thought of them. So the 3 books are all kind of different genres. I guess one would be classed as fantasy, one would be classed as kind of literary fiction, and the other one would be a straight contemporary. So they're all quite different, but I thought I would review them all for you today. So let's get started. The first one I want to talk about is called Almost Love, and it's by Louise O'Neill. I've previously read a couple of books by this author and really enjoyed them, so I was very much looking forward to reading her first adult book, and this is her first one that focuses explicitly on adults and their relationships. What I like about her previous books that I've read, which are Asking for It and Only Ever Yours, are that they are very raw in the way they approach the topic. They don't shy away from big topics, and this one, Almost Love, is exactly the same. It does not shy away from the topic of a relationship that is very toxic, that is very dangerous for the people involved and very hurtful for the people involved. And we follow the young woman who is at the centre of it all, Sarah, and she falls hard for a man called Matthew. So the relationship starts right at the very beginning. We kind of follow her as she is telling us a little bit about her life. We kind of see 2 different storylines throughout the book. So we see her falling in love with Matthew and kind of how that all began. And then we also see even further back before Matthew came into her life, kind of who she was dating before, how she got to this point in her life. And then we see sort of present day, how the relationship is going and what's really happening. So it's a mixture of all of these different timelines interspersed with one another. And it all kind of helps to build on the character of Sarah and finding out about who she is and what she's there for and what she's doing with her life and how things are just not really going very well for her. So what I liked about this book is the fact that it doesn't shy away from big topics. Like I say, it's very open, it's very honest, it's very much feeling as though it could be real. People could easily experience this kind of toxic, friends with benefits, but not quite a relationship, not really big on commitment, just feeling rejection and upset and not really being very clear with your emotions. And I feel like this is something that a lot of people could go through and kind of know from the very beginning of Sarah's story that things aren't great. Things weren't ever great in this relationship. There were moments where it could have been great, and then there were really big falls where she felt like she was made a fool of, or she felt abandoned, or she felt upset. And those areas are really, really well discussed by the author. I feel like she really researched this and she really got in the headspace of someone who would be going through this. There are times where Sarah does stuff that you just want to shake her and say, don't do that, for goodness sake. Just have more respect or have more care for yourself. Like, don't put yourself back in that situation. But of course, if you've ever known people who are in those sorts of relationships that aren't really the best kind, like not that healthy for them, not really something that you would recommend they do. If you've ever known people in those situations, they can't really be helped out of them unless they want to be, because, you know, you only know how you feel in the moment, and other people telling you that it's toxic, that it's bad for you, isn't always going to help you when you're so convinced or trying to convince yourself that it's right when it isn't. And that's what I felt like the author got really right. The thing I felt like she didn't do well was the character of Sarah, because she does all this dislikable stuff and because she is someone that I don't see myself being friends with. I found it really hard to connect with her. She just didn't feel like someone that I could get on with or someone I could fully convince myself was real. The relationship part felt really real. The rest of her life, I felt like she wasn't quite a person. She didn't feel completely fleshed out in the other areas of her life, and I felt like there was more that needed to be done to kind of completely convince me that she was a great character. On the whole, I did like this book. I didn't love it as much as I liked her other books, so I would recommend trying those over this if you are planning to try a Louise O'Neill. But it was decent as a whole, and so I gave it a 3 stars in the end. The next book I want to talk about is Sweet Black Waves, and this is by Christina Perez, and I got sent this by the author in exchange for a review, and of course I'm very happy to give it because actually I really enjoyed this. I would say that this one falls under a fantasy book. It's inspired by the classic fairy tale or tale of Isuet and Tristan, I believe it is, and we follow their story in this book. Now, personally, I had no idea that this was a classic tale because I've never studied classics and I don't know too many of classic tales and tragedies and things like that. But apparently this tale of Isuet and Tristan is kind of the inspiration for things like Romeo and Juliet. Now, with that being said, obviously you can understand there might be some bigger things happening in here than I anticipated, and there were. It was very dramatic. We actually don't focus on the main couple, I suppose you'd say, in this. We focus on the best friend. So we're following Branwen, who is best friends and cousins and almost sisters with the princess of this kingdom, who's called Essie in this book, but is essentially Isuet. So we're following her as our main character, and she is a patriot through and through. She's been raised mostly by her aunt, who is the queen of this land, and her cousin has always been there for her, but she's slightly younger. They're quite different in personalities. Branwen's always been very sort of sure-headed and sure-footed and able to kind of get on with things, whereas Essie is flighty and impulsive, and she just doesn't always think before she makes decisions. So they kind of balance one another out, with Branwen's seriousness being negated by Essie's impulsiveness, and they kind of do that for each other. So what I liked about this book was that it felt very dramatic the whole way through. The pacing is good, and it was definitely a fun adventure story. There are two warring kingdoms in this that we follow, and Branwen, who's from one of them, but one day she goes down to the beach and she finds a washed up man there who is basically almost dead, but she is a healer. She knows how to heal people, so of course she can't help but to heal this man. And then when she realises that she's healed a man who is one of the enemy, she doesn't know what to do. And that's where the story really kind of takes place and begins. Up until that point, it's just character development and kind of getting to know who our main characters are going to be. So personally, I feel like this book actually had some really strong points and then some slightly weakers. The first thing I loved about this was the fact that the two main characters are both female and they have a really strong family friendship together. They're not just kind of rooting for one another because they're family. They also really, really enjoy one another's company, and they have a great relationship throughout pretty much all of the book. And I loved seeing that. Kind of, you don't often see girls in a friendship in this sort of book, fantasy YA books, and I just felt like it was done really, really nicely. So that was my biggest pro of the book, and something that I really, really enjoyed, alongside the action and the adventure, which was just fun and exciting. And the fact that I don't know this story that it's based on meant that I was, filled with surprises as the book went on. So that was great. In terms of the slightly less positive things, I didn't love the fact that the world wasn't really developed to my liking, and the magic of this world is kind of, it's hinted at and you get snippets of it, but it didn't feel like it was fully developed. However, this is the first book in a series, so possibly we will see a lot more of that as the book goes on and kind of unfold more of this magic. But we know that there is magic in the world and that the world has a lot more to offer, I think, than we've initially seen. So I definitely enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. It's one that I would recommend, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The next and final book that I want to talk about in this is Purple Hibiscus, which is by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is actually the first book, I believe, that she published, whereas it is one of the last books of hers that I've read, so I've obviously done this the wrong way round, but still, I really enjoyed this book. This one is literary fiction, essentially. It's based in Nigeria, and we follow a young family, mostly from the point of view of one daughter in that family. And Camberley and her brother live with their mother and father. To all outward appearances, they look like the perfect happy family. They have money, they are well off, they are a family who goes to church frequently, they give out to the poor. They are a family who look happy from the outside. However, they are not, because there is domestic abuse and violence going on in their family. And we follow Camberley and her brother as they go through the torment of watching their father become more and more distressed over the years and seeing him do more and more violent acts as time goes on. So this is really quite a dark story, and I will say now, I don't think it's going to be a book for everyone, especially if you can't deal with things like violence and domestic abuse and torture even, because I would go so far as to say some of the things that the father does are torture, and it's definitely not light-hearted. It's not a light-hearted book. But with that being said, I do think it is a brilliantly written one. Chimamanda has an excellent way of writing a story so that you feel like you're there. I've never been to Nigeria. I've not even been anywhere close. But when I read her words, I feel like I can imagine it clearer than I could if I was watching a video or something, because the way she pulls you into the culture is just fantastic. And she does it so subtly in the background that you don't even really realise that you're being pulled into this classic Nigerian culture and kind of understanding more and more about their world and their culture and the way they do things over there. So I love that element of it, and I think she does that perfectly in all her books. All of the ones I've read so far, it's definitely been the case. So she's just a great writer. With that being said, her characters are also fantastic, and they just really shine out the page. So I couldn't help but to love Camberly right from the start. She is a character who has her head sort of on straight, and although she has some wobbles and she doesn't really know what she wants to do with her life or what she can do, she feels trapped by her father, but she doesn't want to say anything. She doesn't want to go and get help. She just feels like she can't really do anything, and she's kind of trapped. But still, she isn't a vulnerable character the whole way through. She actually develops more and more as the book goes on, and we really see her come into herself and kind of develop and learn who she can be with a little bit of help from some friends. And that is exactly what she gets through her auntie, who is another very prominent character in the book, and her cousins, who also come into it in a big way later on. So the fact that she has a sort of different support system really offers the chance to explore the two different sides of Nigerian living, how sometimes people can appear to be one way, but actually the reality is they are completely different. And again, on the other flip side, her family on her auntie's side is quite poor. They don't really have a lot, and yet they are a lot happier than her family. And this is the kind of contrast that Camberly sees, and that her cousins and her other people in her life eventually see too, when they realise just what she's been going through and what her brother's been going through. And I really think that this story is well worth reading, because even if you don't necessarily always read literary fiction, this is a very approachable way into it. And I feel like Chimamanda is one of those authors who I could probably recommend to almost anyone, and they would like her because she has a great tone, and it's very beautiful the way she writes. So I love this book, and I would thoroughly recommend it if you don't mind the things that I mentioned previously. So again, I gave this a solid 4 stars, and I would thoroughly recommend all her books that I've read so far. So that is everything from me today. Do let me know in the comments which one you are most interested in picking up, and I hope I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.